New Barun, the northwestern city to its sister city, Barun, resides near a mythical forest teeming with mysterious wildlife and magical-like sprites. In ages past, the forest was once a popular hunting ground. As hunters would return from their daily hunt, they would choose to build small camps and settlements in nearby locations, eventually founding what would eventually become the city of New Barun. Though large portions of the hunt have since been outlawed by the Church of Bardus, the newly founded city remained, and in the current day and age, enjoy their own version of prosperity through trade. The two make quick time into the city and find Douglas drinking in the pub. Avin walks up and confronts him, offering to return the Thunderblade to its rightful owner. To Avin's shock, however, Douglas refuses to accept the Thunderblade, stating that the blade is no longer his, as it was rightfully lost due to his poor performance in the wrestling match, even if the outcome was just a fluke. Avin's continued petition falls on deaf ears, as Douglas continues to be obstinate. Frustrated, Avin defaults to his standard strategy of fiery insults, which quickly escalates the situation into a loud argument. Mile, as always, steps in to mediate. First scolding Avin for always resorting to such hot-headed measures, he then confronts Douglas, asking him what is truly more important to him: his own pride, or the importance of carrying on the legacy of his late master, and advises Douglas to accept the Thunderblade, even if it means he has to swallow his own pride to do so. Having been lectured by a boy an entire decade younger than him, Douglas calms down and comes to his senses. Thanking Mile for bringing him to his senses, he and Avin exchange apologies, as Douglas offers to buy the Thunderblade back from Avin and Mile no matter what price they name. Avin, of course, relinquishes the Thunderblade free of charge, though to their surprise, Douglas opts to put the Thunderblade away, explaining that he refuses to wield the blade until he feels that he is worthy of both the blade itself and the legacy of the Sword Saint that he had inherited from Castor. The three of them get to chatting, happy to now be friends with each other. Avin and Mile explain to Douglas the reason why they're traveling to begin with, their search for Eimelle and their ultimate destination of Valkid. Intrigued by Avin's journey, Douglas decides to accompany Avin for the rest of his adventures free of charge, both as a new friend as well as paying back the favor on Thunderblade. Douglas also offers them a lead. He mentions that in the reclusive forests north of New Barun, there have been sightings of a mysterious young girl who had been protecting the local wildlife from hunters. Realizing that this person could be Eimelle, Avin and crew decide to head off to investigate. A quick walk north out of New Barun soon leads them into a mysterious forest. Teeming with spiritual energy, they soon come across a young girl protecting a small creature from a group of hunters, trying her best to convince the three men to turn back home. The three hunters seem uninterested, however, declaring that the hunt is conducted on the authority of a Bishop Avarice, and is therefore sanctioned by the Church of Bardus itself, and the blessings of Bardus will therefore be with those who hunt. Avin and crew happen upon the scene, and although they quickly realize the girl in question isn't Eimelle, they couldn't stand by and watch the situation unfold. They step in to intervene the annoyed hunters, and thanks to Avin's recent fame for winning in the wrestling competition, along with Douglas's already strong reputation, the two were able to throw their weight around to get the hunters to back off. As the three hunters leave in a huff, one of them remarks that he doesn't particularly like the hunt either, but since it is conducted under the will of the bishop, it's an opportunity that they can't turn down. The young girl walks up and thanks them. She says that her name is Archem, having lived in these woods all her life. The small creature behind her also approaches and gives its thanks, its fur leaving behind an extremely pleasing aroma. Archem introduces the small creatures as the Meefas. Considered to be sacred creatures in ages past, these adorable animals love humans but are currently once again being hunted, despite an age-old accord from the Church of Bardus outlawing this exact activity. Having grown up in these woods, Archem has great attachments to the Meefas residing in this forest, and is currently doing all she can to deter the hunters from slaughtering these innocent animals. Even though Douglas's lead didn't bring Avin to Eimelle, he nonetheless decides that they can't just stand by and watch this senseless hunt continue. Avin and crew resolve to help Archem and investigate the cause of why the Meefa hunt had resumed, and accepts Archem's invitation to stop by at her home in the deeper parts of the forest to discuss their next steps. On their way to Archem's abode, the group happened across Dr. Bandel once again, hiking alone into the forests to gather exotic herbs. Dr. Bandel is glad to see Avin and Mile healthy again after their last encounter, and greets Archem as well. Apparently, this isn't her first time in these woods, and Archem had been long acquainted with the doctor. Dr. Bandel remarks that these woods are an excellent source of medicine, in part due to the Meefas' holy presence, though her hunt for a mystical flower remains at large. Leaving the doctor to ponder to herself, the group say their goodbyes and continue on their way. After a long walk, the group finds a secluded cabin in the deep forests, and Archem introduces everyone to her grandfather. Explaining the circumstances of their meeting, Archem's grandfather extends his gratitude to the group for protecting his grandchild, and goes into more detail on the history of their family and these surrounding woods. Archem's family had accepted a charge from the late Archbishop Asperius decades ago to safeguard these woods, and since then have lived in this forest for generations. Avin asks about the significance of these woods, to which Archem's grandfather responds with the story behind the Meefas. These mystical creatures carry an intensely pleasant aroma on their furs. Not only is the pleasant scent capable of calming people, it can also purify the air, ridding their surroundings of any and all pollutants. Due to this, Meefa furs used to fetch a high price among the nobility of the past, and the practice of hunting Meefas had driven these creatures to near extinction. As Meefas also carry the status of being sacred creatures said to be linked to Durga herself, Archbishop Asperius pressured the royal family to implement a decree banning the hunt of Meefas and the sale of all Meefa furs. Without that being said, Archem's grandfather is equally shocked that the Meefa hunt had resumed. When the group mentions one of the hunters remarking something about their hunt being encouraged by a Bishop Avarice speaking for the Church of Bardus, this came as disturbing news. Archem's grandfather projecting that the resumed hunt will lead the already endangered Meefas to extinction, and cites a line from ancient scriptures prophesizing disastrous omens should the Meefas be wiped out. They decide that it must now be their first priority to speak with Bishop Avarice and convince him to stop the hunt before it's too late. Archem's grandfather drafts a letter of protest asking Avin and crew to present it to the bishop in person, as he is currently staying as a guest in Benequia Monastery, a sisterhood of the Church of Bardus located west of New Barun. Not willing to sit around, Archem volunteers to come along as well as the group leaves the forest and speeds back towards New Barun. Before moving to Benequia Monastery, the group finds Karamis once again in New Barun, looking for inspiration. As this affair is already old news by now, Avin and Mile happily oblige the writer and head off after a brief rest. Their arrival at Benequia Monastery was not a welcome one. The monastery is a sisterhood, and men are traditionally forbidden from entering their sanctum. Avin and crew somewhat sheepishly approach the sisters at the gate, announcing their intention to meet with Bishop Avarice, only to be met with cold glares, prayers to Bardus on behalf of their sins, and a dismissive answer that the bishop has been residing in what used to be their head sister's office. Feeling the unwelcome atmosphere clearer than ever, Avin leads the party inside, trying to finish their business as quickly as possible. Inside the monastery, the group come across a young sister in her teens named Yuna, who immediately regards the men in front of her with great bewilderment. Just like the sisters at the door, she mistakes Avin's crew as hunters here to deliver more Meefa furs, and scolds them furiously for participating in the slaughter of these innocent animals. Avin tries to clear up the misunderstanding, introducing themselves and telling Yuna that they're actually here to stop the hunt, and tries to prove their intention with Archem's presence. This was enough to placate Yuna, who instead starts complaining about Bishop Avarice and his numerous list of misdeeds. While Yuna had warmed up to Avin's party considerably, she still reminds them that the inner sanctum is forbidden to men and runs off, but not before weirdly remarking that Avin's name and face seem strangely familiar to her. The party makes their way to Bishop Avarice, announcing their intention to talk about Meefas with him. Assuming Avin's crew is here on business matters, Avarice gladly welcomes them in, but the warm welcome quickly plummets into an ice-cold reception when he discovers Avin bringing a letter of protest as opposed to more furs. Archem pleads with the bishop, begging him to stop the Meefa hunt, but Avarice, completely apathetic to the Meefas, rips the letter to shreds. Avin is enraged by Avarice and directly rebukes him, demanding to know why Avarice is so willing to trample over the legacies set in place by Archbishop Asperius. The immoral man of the cloth haughtily dismisses the name, and goes as far as to mock Asperius in death as a frail old man who had failed to protect Cathedral. As Avin and Eimelle were raised by the late Archbishop, this insult to Asperius shook Avin to his core and made him see red. As Avin is barely able to control his rage, Mile quietly tries to pull his friend back as the ever-arrogant Bishop Avarice threatens his unwelcome visitors, demanding them leave immediately lest they be detained by the church for daring to verbally abuse a bishop. Faced with the disgusting man, even Douglas joins in, declaring their position as members of the Adventurers Guild, which had always operated as a secular organization. Speaking for the guild on this matter, Douglas informs Bishop Avarice that his threats will never hold sway over their actions and they will not be backing off from this issue. As the situation comes to a deadlock, Archem timidly walks up to Avin, begging them to call off the petition for now as the situation clearly isn't going anywhere. As they leave Avarice's office in a huff, Avin asks if Archem had given up. Though Archem is certainly saddened by the vile bishop currently in office, she nonetheless remains resolute in her stance to save the Meefas no matter what. The group agree to return to New Barun for now to discuss their next steps. Though just as Avin is about to leave, an extremely familiar voice hastily calls out to him, freezing him in his tracks. Avin turns around to see Sister Olesia, accompanied by Yuna, quickly approaching him. Having not seen each other since the fall of Cathedral 8 years ago, the mother figure in Avin's life that had been estranged for so long suddenly showed herself in Benequia Monastery. Overcome with emotion at this reunion, Avin and Olesia share a warm hug, as years of longing convert themselves to warm and happy tears. Olesia invites Avin and his friends inside to catch up over some tea before they depart. Over a cup of homely and warm tea, Olesia and Avin catch up on events of the past 8 years of separation. As she marveled with pride at how Avin had grown into a respectable young man under the tutelage of Sage Lemurus, she told Avin that since the attack on Cathedral, Olesia had taken Eimelle for shelter in Benequia Monastery, where they had lived for the past 8 years, hoping the influence of the Cult of Octum had not reached the eastern half of Alfilden. In fact, it was Yuna who told Olesia that a man named Avin had arrived at Benequia Monastery. As Yuna had become best friends with Eimelle over 8 years, the name of Eimelle's dear brother had constantly left her lips. Realizing that Olesia and Eimelle are not only safe from the aftermath of Cathedral's fall, but are living here, an overjoyed Avin quickly asks to see Eimelle, only to be met with solemn faces by both Olesia and Yuna. A devastated Olesia broke the news to Avin that Eimelle had disappeared from Benequia Monastery just a few weeks ago. Yuna told the group that ever since Eimelle had turned 15 years old, she began hearing the voice of Durga and realized both her identity as Durga's daughter and the cruel destiny that this role would ultimately place on her. Following the voice of the Mother of Creation, Eimelle left a goodbye letter to Olesia and Yuna and left the monastery without a trace. All efforts made by Olesia since then to locate her has sadly been in vain. As a tearful Olesia recounts the story of Eimelle's departure, Avin's sadness quickly evaporates. Now more determined than ever, Avin once again reiterates his newfound resolve to locate his sister no matter what it takes. Their conversation then quickly moves to the topic that had brought the group here to begin with, the arrival of Bishop Avarice and the Meefa hunt. Olesia tells them that Bishop Avarice had risen to power since the fall of Cathedral, having bought his way up the ranks of the church with large sums of monetary donations in the immediate aftermath of the attack. And now, under the guise of a religious tour, He had arrived in New Barun with the sole intention of slaughtering Meefas to sell their furs to the aristocracy for a large amount of profit for even more personal gain, even if it meant the extinction of those sacred creatures. An outraged Yuna in private company joins in and vocalizes her dislike toward avarice, not only blatantly disregarding the rule prohibiting men from inhabiting Benequia Monastery, he had even forced Olesia out of her personal study and converted it into his office. Though with Avin and Archem bringing more perspective on the seriousness of the situation, despite her hands being mostly tied, Olesia assures the group that she will personally write a letter to Valkid, addressed to the Archbishop Krar, who, much like Asperius during his life, is an upright and incorruptible man, intending to inform the Archbishop of the misconduct happening in New Barun. With this, Avin and Archem breathes a sigh of relief, as it seems that this letter will be enough to not only stop the Meefa hunt, but perhaps oust Bishop Avarice once and for all. Olesia wishes the group safe travels, as Archem decides to return home for now. With Avin's identity as Eimmelle's brother revealed, the sisters at Benequia Monastery not only offered their apologies for the initial cold treatment towards the group, but had even made exceptions for Avin and his friends to enter the monastery at will. Since Eimelle was such a beloved figure in the monastery, they began to treat Avin like family. Finally leaving Benequia Monastery with everyone's blessing, and a promise to one day return and visit, Avin's group sets off and returns to New Barun. On the way back, however, a mysterious man wearing a face of death and a tattered cloak stops the group, asking if they are bound toward New Barun. He takes out a mysterious potion and splashes it over Avin's crew, and eerily informs them that New Barun had received the wrath of divine judgment, and they should get out as fast as they can. Leaving no time for a puzzled Avin to question him any further, the man heads off towards Benequia Monastery. Though the group is exceptionally confused by the man and his actions, Douglas slips in a comment that though he seemed to bear no ill will towards Avin's group, he's an exceptionally deadly individual, and just his movements alone show an unfathomable strength lurking underneath. But once the group sets foot in New Barun, the man's warning could not have been more accurate. Throughout the entire town, a poisonous purple haze has set in, leaving much of the citizenry bedridden due to the miasma. The group found themselves struggling to breathe as the foul air not only smelled like rotten eggs, but seemed to sap their strength with every second in its presence. The strange elixir that the man had just applied to them seems to be kicking in against its bog, alleviating the worst of the symptoms, though the sight of a town filled with the air of death was an exceptionally concerning matter. As the group wondered if this is what the man meant by wrath of divine judgment, they headed off to the northern exit to regroup at Archem's house. At the northern exit out of New Barun, Avin's group pauses, alarmingly realizing that the once aromatic winds that blew in from the north were no longer present. As the group stops to examine the phenomena, an ever so familiar figure stumbles in from the right. A delirious and exhausted Shannon, also slowly succumbing to the effects of the poisonous fog, saunters into the scene, mumbling to herself about her shining prince. Upon spotting Mile, Shannon gleefully runs up to him, much to Mile's horror. But while Shannon rambles on about her having left her home alone in search of her prince, and that her fortuitous meeting with Mile in this now desolate wasteland of a town is fate, Shannon quickly succumbs to the miasma and collapses as suddenly as she appeared. The group takes Shannon to the local inn for treatment, while Avin regales Douglas and Archem with likely a hyper-exaggerated tale about Shannon's one-sided infatuation. Mile quietly flees from her room, terrified at the thought that an unarmed 17-year-old girl has decided to subject herself to mortal danger just for the sake of finding him. As the team regroups, they decide to leave Shannon in the second floor inn, still temporarily insulated from the effects of the ground level miasma, and proceed with their investigation. As the group made their way back to Archem's lodgings to once again meet with her grandfather, they went over the events of what had happened with Bishop Avarice and about the plagued air now permeating through the streets of New Barun. Archem's grandfather recalls the ancient prophecy of ruin should the Meefas disappear, and surmises that this is indeed what had transpired. As it turns out, to the south of New Barun, there is a highly toxic swamp whose miasmic air is dangerous to human life. Though thanks to the spitter woods in the north, the furs of the Meefas native to the woods exude an aromatic cleansing air, which had always counteracted the poison from the south. They conclude that is what the root of the prophecy had been all this time. The Meefas' presence were vital to the survival of New Barun. Concerningly, the reappearance of the miasma confirmed their fears. The Meefas are no longer present in the spirit woods. While the group is apprehensive that perhaps the overzealous hunters had returned and truly hunted the creatures to extinction, Archem insists that there may still be hope. It is still possible that the previously human-loving Meefas had simply started to fear them as a consequence of the hunt. Her grandfather recalls the Garuda Cave, an intricate cave system hidden to the east in the deeper parts of the Spiritwood, which would make a natural shelter for the now frightened Meefas. With the safety of everyone in New Barun on the line, Avin's crew decides to head into Garuda Cave to try and locate the holy animals, with Archem also insisting that she tag along to see the matter through. The team hastily departs for Garuda Cave. To their relief, soon after entering the caverns, they heard the familiar mewlings of the Meefa much deeper inside, along with the familiar aromatic scent of their furs. Though concerningly, the mews of the Meefa seem to be desperate and fearful. Garuda Cave is exceptionally hostile. Being in such an isolated location made room for some truly terrifying animals to exist in these caves as the apex predator. While the crew is aloof to the fact that the hunt had driven these Meefas to choose such a dangerous hideout over continuing to reside in the forest, they quickly pressed onwards to try to locate the animals. Sure enough, at the end of the cave system, the Meefas were discovered to be cowering from local overgrown wildlife, having discovered their next meal. A fierce battle against the untamed wildlife began in the caves as Avin's crew desperately fights through the overgrown alpha predators. The dominant species of the deep woods are no joke, carrying enough firepower that even the senior adventurer that is Douglas found it a rather difficult battle. But the group persevered and were ultimately able to stave off the aggressive wildlife. As the Meefas swarm Avin's crew with hugs and nuzzles in gratitude, Archem, their most devoted protector and friend, appeals to the sacred animals, pleading for them to return to New Barun to save the citizens there, and assuring them that they will never be hunted again. The ever-adorable Meefas, rallied by Archem, speeds off to New Barun and began to cleanse the miasma. As the holy creatures occupy the poisoned town and work their magic, Avin and crew make it back shortly after, marveling at the incredible latent power of these creatures. With the bog lifted, the citizens of New Barun are cured of their afflictions. As the townsfolk discover the Meefa's affinity toward humans are as strong as ever, even the former Meefa hunters bow their heads in shame, realizing the calamity that they had wrought with their recklessness, and promising to protect the Meefas forevermore. Though the situation seems to have resolved, there is one final loose end to tie up. Bishop Avarice must be told to renounce his ways. With even the citizenry now adamantly abandoning the hunt, the group tries to visit him in Benequia Monastery once again, hoping that this time he can change his mind. Before they set off, a wayward Jimenez had found his way to New Barun. Karamis had given the man the slip after drinks in Barun, and he is just one step too late to catch the wayward author. Though he still had good news for Avin, as the first volume of their newest best-selling series, Laban the Swift, had begun to hit store shelves. Jimenez happily passes along a first edition copy of the inaugural volume to the caricature of the protagonist before leaving town in pursuit of Karamis, and so beginning their game of cat and mouse anew. Making their way back to Benequia Monastery, the group discovers that Bishop Avarice is not in his office. As it turns out, the man had headed into the worship room of the monastery, having already heard that New Barun was succumbing to the miasma. Though instead of trying to save the citizenry, he began to formulate his self-serving plans even more. now trying to spread propaganda to have the desperate citizenry kill every last Meefa to receive a bogus blessing from Bardus before departing the region with all the Meefa furs he could want, and returning to Rouca to sell them to the aristocracy to curry more favor with the upper class. His plans are interrupted by the cloaked man from earlier, apparently having snuck his way in, and had been shadowing the corrupt bishop. The mysterious man announces himself as a specter from 15 years past and declares his intention to kill Avarice for his sins from that fated time, allowing the now panicking bishop his last moments to repent for his sins. A terrified Avarice begins to hastily recollect events from 15 years ago, but his self-serving nature and greedy personality had already plunged him to ignorance. He sputters out some bare minimum recollection of serving as the bishop in the town of Brijak back then, but seems to be truly unable to recount the sin that he had committed. The man simply gives a chilling laugh in response, declaring the bishop as beyond salvation, and moves in for the strike, causing Avarice to let out a terrifying scream, alerting Avin's crew to his location. The group quickly runs into the worship chamber as Avarice, now having lost all of the arrogance and pride from hours ago, cowers behind Avin's party and pleading with them for protection. As Avin demands to know what the man intends to do, he simply replies that he is here to give Avarice his deserved retribution, and he won't hesitate to cut down anyone that stands in his way. Realizing the man's swordsmanship is far beyond Avin, Douglas decides to step in, hoping to match the assassin in Avin's stead to protect him. The man watches Douglas take his stance and identifies him as the student of the late Sword Saint Castor. Musing to himself that he had always admired Castor's swordsmanship and longed to spar with that now passed on legend, he finds that Douglas, as a student, is still lacking the same draw that his illustrious master had. As the two prepare to clash, Olesia enters the scene and intervenes, calling the man Magnum, demanding him stand down as violence within the monastery is strictly forbidden. Seeing Olesia's face, Magnum seems to oblige, as Olesia demands to know why he's intent on killing Avarice, to which Magnum replies that he is simply taking revenge as Avarice is the man who had killed a person named Dominique. Though Olesia sternly refuses, reminding Magnum that Dominique in life was a pure and innocent girl, and watching the man she cared about plunge himself so deep into the abyss for the sake of vengeance would break her heart, and once again requests Magnum stand down. Though Magnum's vengeance is clearly not stated, it seems Olesia's words were enough to get him to back down for now, as his appetite for slaughter has seemed to wane in her presence. Warning Avarice to sleep with one eye open, Magnum quietly departs from the monastery, leaving a now fearful Bishop Avarice pleading with everyone to save his pitiful life. With Avarice in this terrified state, Olesia retakes control of the monastery, getting him to voluntarily admit to his crimes of corruption, and sentences Bishop Avarice back to Valkyd to receive judgment from the Archbishop for his crimes, a much more viable alternative to being killed by Magnum. Olesia takes Avin's crew back to her reclaimed office and briefly talk about the events that had transpired. She tells the group a bit more about Magnum. Decades ago, he, Olesia, and a girl named Dominique were three close friends who had all joined the Church of Bardus. Magnum was once a devoted student of the Sage of Strength Gawain, while Dominique and Olesia were both sisters to the Church of Bardus. Though 15 years ago, an immense tragedy occurred in the town of Canafia, which caused Dominique to lose her life. As the two were close lovers before her death, a traumatized Magnum left the Church of Bardus in the wake of the tragedy. Both Olesia and Magnum had suspected that Avarice had a hand in Dominique's death in some way, and that was perhaps the reason Magnum surfaced today in an attempt on the man's life. The topic then moved to Avarice's arraignment. Though the weak-willed bishop had willingly confessed to his acts of corruption, Olesia is concerned that on his journey back to Valkyd to receive his sentencing, Magnum may stalk and murder him along the way. Avin's group talks it over and decides to have Douglas act as Avarice's sentry. A skilled swordsman in his own right, Douglas can at least repel any attempts on Avarice's life by Magnum. though Douglas is initially hesitant, insisting that his favor for the Thunderblade had not been fully repaid. He eventually acquiesces, as they determine this to be the best course of action. With the now fallen from grace avarice in tow, Douglas bids Avin and Mile goodbye. Thanking Mile again for opening his eyes, and praising Avin for the good time they've had together, he tells the group that he will stay in Valcad after escorting Avarice there for sentencing, and continue his work from there. Promising the group that once they find a meal and also make it to Valcad, they'll definitely meet again and hang out. With the hope of a reunion later down the road, Douglas departs from the group. Avin's team leaves shortly after, intending to escort Archem home and then make their way to the next city, Guia. Olesia and Avin give their heartfelt parting words to each other as the group departs New Barun on a high note. In the crossroad leading to the Spirit Woods, Archem's grandfather comes out, meeting the group halfway to collect his granddaughter after their adventure. As Archem, now surprisingly having developed feelings for Avin after their time together, bids a timid farewell, the group parts ways. Despite Archem's sudden shyness around Avin, he is none the wiser to the situation. Mile seemed amused by this, and much to Avin's confusion, makes fun of how incredibly dense Avin is at this situation. With Douglas and Archem having come and gone, and the Meefas situation resolved successfully, Avin and Mile set off once again in search of the wayward Eimelle, their next destination being the town of Steel, Guia. Guia, the town of iron and steel. As the industrial heart of Alfilden, Guia's factories work year-round to bring about the newest technological marvels to the continent. Between the Adventurers Guild, the Church of Bardus, and the royal family of Alfilden, requests made to the Guia workshops seemingly never end, and the industrious workers will always deliver. The massive city is split in two, a residential area and a factory area. While the factory area is constantly abuzz with activity, the people in the residential zones enjoy a rather peaceful life in contrast, directly benefiting from the city's production output. As Avin and Mile arrive in Guia, they marvel at the incredible factory city. Rails and minecarts line not just the workshops but around the city district itself. Their sightseeing is quickly interrupted by the voice of a small boy, welcoming them to Guia by telling them about the mine tracks. As they chat with the blonde boy, Avin and Mile mention in passing that they're adventurers, a topic that greatly excites the kid as he brings up a proposal for Avin and Mile. However, before he's able to say anything, he seems spooked by someone in the distance and runs off. A woman approaches from the left, asking if they've seen a blonde boy about 13 years of age. Clearly, this woman is the person that the kid just ran off to avoid. Avin and Mile oblige and see her off in the same direction that the boy ran off to, wondering to themselves what the deal is with those two. But back to the topic of their visit to Guia. Avin and Mile decide to find Rouca, who they had met back in Barun, trying to help him find his sister as well. As they wonder if Rouca has since managed to locate his lost sibling, the two head into the Guia factory to look for their friend. On their way there, who else should they run into but the runaway author Karamas? While Avin questions why the author is so intent on constantly being on the run from his editor, Karamas gives him the shiftiest response imaginable, as that's just how he operates. As a free-spirited writer who only writes when inspiration strikes, this comes with the unfortunate side effect of not being conducive to the deadlines and schedules set by an editorial staff. Though Avin briefly wonders how Karamas became the world-renowned author that he reportedly is with such flaky discipline to his craft, they nonetheless provide him the brief summary of their adventures thus far to further ignite his inspiration. Resuming their journey to the factory, the two find themselves confronted again with the blonde boy from earlier as they pick up from their previous conversation. The boy, named Rael, brings up the proposal he has for Avin and Mile from last time. Though surprisingly, instead of asking the two to help him with some sort of request, Rael instead asks to join them in their adventure, claiming himself to be an exceptionally powerful magician. Though once again, before Rael could elaborate anymore, he is spooked and runs off as the woman from before approaches a second time. Apologizing for troubling Avin and Mile once more, the woman asks them where Rael ran off to, introducing herself as Eleanor, a professor at the Magic Academy just southwest of Guia, the only institute of magic education in all of Elfilden. She had come to Guia to track down Rael, who is one of her students. She tells the two that Rael was born with a natural affinity and talent toward magic, and considering his enrollment in the academy at the age of 13, he is an undisputed genius. But precisely because of that, Rael is a particularly troublesome student due to his tendency to skip class, and is always more keen to play instead of study. Though Rael is Eleanor's prized student, this facet of his behavior has caused her no end of headaches. Explaining that magic can be a dangerous tool in the hands of the undisciplined, Eleanor has tried everything she can think of to have Rael take his education and personal growth more seriously, but with very little effectiveness. As time is tight and she must return to the academy to teach her next class, she asks Avin and Mile to keep an eye out for Rael, and if they see him again, convince him to return to class. Avin and Mile agree to locate her truant pupil if they ever meet again, as Eleanor hurriedly leaves Guia. With Eleanor's new request in mind, Avin and Mile resume their business and approach the factory entrance to speak with the guards, explaining that they're here to visit Rouca. The guard is surprisingly nonchalant and welcomes them in without additional fanfare, as the Guia factory has a surprisingly open policy to visitors, pointing them to the direction of the foreman's office. At the door to the head office, the duo overhears a fiery argument inside, something about refusing to manufacture weaponry. But before they could get a better idea of what was discussed, the door flings open and several hooded men walk out, shooting an icy cold glare at Avin and Mile as they leave. Though extremely creeped out by the shady people, Avin and Mile walk in, greeted by a still angry foreman shouting after the men on their ridiculous requests. Seeing two new guests enter, the foreman regains his composure and welcomes them in, introducing himself as Cassel, the foreman of the Guia factory. Avin and Mile express their desire to meet up with Rouca, which was enough for Foreman Cassel to identify the two as Avin and Mile. Rouca seems to have told the foreman about their meeting in Barun. Since Guia was the town that first adopted Rouca and now employs him in their factories, the foreman has always had a soft spot for the kid. He tells Avin and Mile that Rouca's out on the workshop floor but is expected to return soon, and asks them to make themselves comfortable, apologizing for a lack of hospitality as he's currently swamped with work. Not content to just sit around and seeing that Cassel seems to be exceptionally busy, Avin and Mile volunteer to help out around the factory while they wait. Though Foreman Cassel initially refuses, unwilling to put his guests to work, Avin and Mile insisted on helping and eventually were asked to inspect the factory. As the two toured the shop floor, they greeted the workers and were introduced to the massive crucibles in the factory, carrying molten steels through pipelines like blood through vessels. After a quick inspection and tour around the shop, Avin and Mile wrap up their errand for the foreman and head back. When they reach the foreman's office again, the two are glad to see Rouca returning from his task. Rouca as well is happy to see his two new friends arrive in Guia safe and sound, and they spend a bit of time to catch up on the things that have happened since. Regrettably, Rouca had made zero progress on tracking down his own sister, Rutis, but he did give Avin and Mile an incredible lead. People in the bars and pubs of Guia have been talking about a mysterious red-haired girl being spotted by travelers who came to Guia from Beloa to the west. Avin is shocked by this news and asks Rouca for all the information he knows. Rouca tells them that the travelers who came from Beloa noticed a girl with blazing red hair wandering north out of Guia toward the distant village of Karuna. A strange sight, as not many people typically travel that far north alone. Cassel explains while most of the continent obeys the word of the Church of Bardus and worships the god of light, Karuna village has always been an exception. They venerate the goddess Durga. As Eimelle is Durga's daughter, her being drawn to Karuna made too much sense. Avin and Mile decide that this cannot be a coincidence and plan to set off for Karuna immediately. They say a hasty farewell to Rouca and Foreman Cassel, quickly setting off toward this northern village. But on their way out, who else should they run into but Jimenez, just a few minutes too late to catch the author on the run. Though Jimenez laments the fact that he has to constantly chase Karamas halfway around the world just for his next draft, it is what he has to do just so the eccentric author can produce the best-selling hits that he's known for. Avin and Mile reassures him that they'll also do their best to help Karamas, much to his relief. Jimenez tells them that the second volume of Laban the Swift is ready and hands them a first edition copy as thanks. Resuming their journey to Karuna, the two were stopped again at the exit to Guia by a young local girl, identifying them by their features but not their names, claiming that she was sent here on an errand to deliver a letter to them. From a girl named Eimelle. As the little girl runs off, none the wiser, leaving a letter from Eimelle in the hands of Avin, who presumably is currently hyperventilating from this news, they eagerly rip open the envelope and start reading. It turns out Eimelle is currently staying in Guia, and upon hearing from some locals that someone matching the description of her brother has made his way here, she eagerly wrote him a letter to inform him of her whereabouts. Eimelle says that she is currently staying with Grandma Rao, a kindly old woman living in the southeast of Guia, and they should go there right away. Overjoyed to have found Eimelle at last, Avin and Mile decide to head over immediately, though Mile can't help but wonder to himself as they went, if Eimelle was in Guia all this time, does that mean the rumors that Rouca overheard were wrong? But regardless, the two of them make their way to Grandma Rao's house and are greeted by a kind grandmother. The old woman identifies Avin as the brother that Eimelle had described. She then greets them warmly and invites Avin and Mile in for some tea, telling the two that Eimelle is currently out on a brief errand and will be back soon. As they stepped into the grandmother's home, Rael, still roaming the streets of Guia, catches a glimpse of his two new friends, quickly hatching an idea for himself and runs off. Rao treats her two newest guests to tea, whilst praising Eimelle for being a thoughtful young girl, telling Avin that she's gone off to the general store to buy her some pain medications and should be back momentarily. Feeling the relief of finally coming close to finding his estranged sister after 8 years of separation, Avin and Mile take the warm drinks and gulp it down, feeling the soothing tea relax their nerves as their minds are put to ease for the first time in a long time. As they downed cup after cup of the delicious red tea, a wave of sleepiness started to come over them as Avin relaxed in the old woman's home. Noticing that they seem tired from their long journey, Grandma Rao invites them to take a nap if they wish, and offers Mile a new cup, mentioning him by name. Except, wait a minute, alarm bells suddenly rang off in Mile's head. They've never introduced themselves to this woman. How could she have known Mile's name? Mile and Avin met each other 8 years ago after Avin had been separated from Eimelle on the other side of the continent, so there's no way Eimelle could have known about him either. In fact, while they sat here drinking cup after cup of this tea, the old woman's never even touched her cup. Oh no. Before Mile could get Avin out of the situation, the drugged tea begins to work its magic, putting both of them to sleep. Grandma Rao removes her disguise, revealing herself to be the same black-haired girl that last confronted Avin and Mile outside Sage Dinerkin's residence and previously paralyzed them with a spell. Though the girl confessed that assuming the identity of Avin's sister as a ruse was distastefully underhanded, it was nonetheless necessary to achieve her goals. Rummaging through a sleeping Avin's pocket, she quickly found Cabeza and took it in her possession. Before the girl can abscond with her prize, Manam of all people wanders into the scene. Assuming her as a petty thief, he warns her in his usual cold demeanor to drop the Cabeza, as that is not some common jewelry to be pilfered if she was after money. The girl refuses and clashes with Manam, showing a surprisingly high aptitude in combat. Manam then surmises that the girl before him is no petty thief, but instead a member of Octum's cult. Though the girl in turn mistakenly pegs Manam as a follower of Bardus, which he snidely denies. As their duel continues, Madam manages to knock the cabeza out of her hand. Having seen her combat abilities, he praises her aptitude but remarks that she is still leagues below him in a serious fight. Sizing his prey as a girl in her teens, Madam wonders why someone like her would willingly relinquish herself to the side of evil and become another one of their puppets. In response, the girl refutes Madam's claim that Archem is a malevolent deity, saying that she was forsaken by Bardis in her time of despair, and the goals pursued by Archem to shatter this flawed world and to rebuild it as a utopia is far more preferable to the suffering of this current world. Mocking the girl as someone who would rather lean on the desperate prayers to a fallen deity rather than finding the strength to stand on her own, Madam laments her poor existence as the two resume their duel. Meanwhile, Rael had managed to drag Rouca out of the factory to put his genius plan into motion. Turns out with all the classes that Rael has skipped to play in Guia, he and Rouca are basically best friends with each other. Knowing that Rouca is a mutual friend to Avin and Mile, Rael had pulled Rouca here, hoping he could help convince the two to bring Rael along on their adventures. Rouca, however, is skeptical. Not only did he point Avin and Mile toward Karuna, but everyone in town knows that Grandma Rao is abroad right now, so why would Avin and Mile be in her house of all places? Besides, as much as Rouca could vouch for Rael's capabilities, much like his teacher, he too has doubts about Rael's maturity. Regardless, Rael manages to drag Rouca to the vacant home of Grandma Rao, only to come upon the scene of Madam and the girl in the middle of their fight. As Rouca barged in, he gets a good look at the girl that had been hunting Avin and Mile since the start of their journey, and freezes in shock, while Rael looks at the two bodies on the floor, demanding to know what's happened. Madam makes a hasty retreat from the scene, with Rael shouting after him, while a frozen Rouca manages to utter the girl's name, Rutis, the sister that he had been looking for all this time. Rutis, equally as shocked to see Rouca here, panics and flees the scene as well, as Rouca desperately chases after his sister, distraught on having found her in this circumstance. A hysteric Rael tries to rouse Avin and Mile from their sleep.